Cloud. All right, we're good.
Good. Okay. So just to tell you a little bit about me, Debbie Simone, I started out in the construction office in Gloucester Township back in 2000. So it took me quite some time and classes to become a certified technical assistant. From there, I got involved with zoning and a little bit in planning. I became the planning board recording secretary at that time. And as I got into the different parts of municipal government, it's the more I learned and the more interested I became in what else was out there. So for the last 20 years, I've been involved in municipal government and handling construction permits, planning, and zoning. Just recently, I met Dan on Zoom doing the real estate class. So I did take that, pass that, just have to take my test. It's definitely been an interesting road. I'm also a certified zoning officer, both in the borough of Magnolia and in the borough of Berlin. Berlin is my full-time town, and Magnolia, I'm there part-time. I'm also the land use administrator in the township of Waterford. So I only deal with the planning board there. I don't do anything else there. I currently have people signing up for my next class for the technical assistant certification course at Camden County College. That's due to start in September. It's going to be a hybrid class. It's actually the first one being taught as a hybrid class. So you'll have some online, some in-class time. I would have to say that I find the planning and zoning part of it a little bit more interesting than the construction permit end, because the construction permit end is a little bit more regulated, very regimented. So because I'm the only person in my office, I actually get to see a project from development stage, vacant land, all the way to issuing the last CO of the house. So I love it. I love what I do. And I think that's probably why I work as much as I do, because I love it. It's never the same thing twice. There's always a lot to learn. And then just to start, I guess we'll start with some zoning stuff. Every municipality is going to have different zoning regulations. They have their own ordinances that they abide by. So it's not going to be the same in every town. The only time that zoning regulations will be the same, it's more or less the process. So you have to file an application. There's a fee for that. Rule of thumb, anything disturbing the footprint of the property is going to require a survey. I will tell you that sometimes that's a struggle when properties are sold. A lot of times buyers are told, oh, you don't have to have a survey. And a lot of times they don't at the time of purchase. But when they go to put a pool or a deck or a fence or anything of that nature up, we need a copy of the survey. The survey will show us easements, restrictions. I can't tell that by looking at a tax map. It's not always on there. The survey is going to be a little more descriptive on what's on the property. So, I mean, coming from maybe a real estate agent standpoint or an investor standpoint, that you want to make sure that at some point in time you get a recent survey. This way you know exactly what you can and can't do on that property. Zoning permits, if you have to get a zoning permit, you have the zoning official has 10 days to approve or deny that permit. If it is not approved or denied within that 10-day time frame, it's an automatic approval. Where during the construction permit process, it's 10 to 20 business days. And if it's not released in that time frame, then it's an automatic denial. So it's a little bit different, because the construction permit end of it, the denial allows you to go in front of the Board of Appeals. From zoning, you end up in court, like that's the next step. So zoning kind of handles it itself by giving the approval. Zoning officials are also those that handle enforcing of after a project has gone through the development process, in front of the land use board. Zoning is the enforcing agency of that. So compliance with any conditions that are imposed on a developer is enforced by the zoning official. We hear a lot of, when a property is being sold, oh, this is grandfathered in. It's a term that people use, but municipal land use law does not have a term, or, that grandfathered is not a term. The correct term to use would be legal non-conforming. So for instance, if you have a structure that's being used as a residence, but it's in a commercial zone, however, it's been a residence for, 20, 30 years. And maybe somewhere along the line, the municipal government changed their zoning. And now this residential property is sitting in a commercial zone. Well, it's legal non-conforming. It's allowed to be there because that's what it's been. It's going to be to the discretion of the zoning officer should the structure be demolished or need to be, or destroyed, I should say, more than 50%. That's usually the rule of thumb. Then the zoning officer will be determine whether or not a variance is required to rebuild. The variance process is what happens in front of the land use board. There's an application, there's fees, there's engineering. It's a little bit of a process, but there's different types of variances. There's 6 different D variances. There's C variances. So your C variances are your bulk standards, your setbacks, your property lines. Your D variances are use, height, things like that. And that's all approved at the land use board. Some municipalities will have a joint land use board. Both of the towns, actually all 3 of the towns that I work in, have a joint land use board. So it's planning and zoning. What that means is that there's usually 2 members of the governing body, which would be, sometimes it's the mayor, sometimes it's a mayor designee, and someone from the council or committee, depending on how the town is set up. Berlin and Magnolia both have councils, where Waterford Township has a committee. So it's just different in how the government is run itself. So those 2 members cannot vote on a use variance. They can't vote because a use variance involves the financial aspect of the municipality. So potentially it could affect the finances of the town, which is why they're not allowed to vote. You have to have a quorum. A quorum is 2/3. So whether it's a 9-member board or it's a split board, you still have to have that quorum to hold a meeting. Zoning has to happen before you can go through the construction process. So if you're developing the approval from the zoning first, depending on the town, and every town is set up differently, you have to get the zoning approval before you can even apply for the construction permit. Once that's done, then you can move through the remainder of the process. And usually the zoning officer will require like I said, a survey, the application. The survey has to be sealed. It has to be done by a New Jersey state licensed engineer. It can't happen from, I've had people call me and say, well, can I take a picture of the tax map and just draw where everything is? They're not certified. They can't really stipulate where things go, where they are. Half the time they're not even sure where their property markers are. So me as a zoning officer, I don't like that. I won't accept it. It has to be on a survey. So once you get through the zoning process and you start the construction end of it, the construction permit end is a little more detailed. I can tell you that from a standpoint of buying an investment property or even from a real estate standpoint, if you go into a property and say somebody finished their basement and there's no permits on file for it. So the Department of Community Affairs, because of all of that, and there was issues with inspectors that were having people rip out walls because they couldn't see behind them. There's a process called a CCO. So it's a certificate of continued occupancy. There's a bulletin in the Uniform Construction Code book. And I mean, I have it here. It's, if you could see it, it's bulletin 06-1. And it's in the Uniform Construction Code book. And what that says is if work is found to be done without a permit, then the process would be to file for a CCO permit. And what that does is that allows the inspectors to go in and do just a visual inspection. They're not allowed to make you rip open walls, pull out electric, take the sheetrock down, nothing like that, unless they see something that they feel could create an imminent hazard. And at that point, they can say, well, you have to open this up because they need to tell you why. We had a recent incident where someone did finish their basement without a permit. They used metal studs, which is fine. They ran wire through the metal studs, but there was no grommet. Without the grommet, it's a fire hazard. And it just so happened that there was one part of the wall that the electrical inspector was able to kind of like peek behind, and that's how he saw it. So he did make them take the wall down. Became a big expense. So from just as a suggestion, when you come across properties, your first visit should be your construction and zoning office. Check and see, you know, are there permits, violations, anything like that that need to be addressed before the purchase of the property. 9 times out of 10, if it's a flip and, you know, the property is vacant and you're picking it up at a good price and you just want to go in and, you know, do some minor repairs, that's fine. But a lot of times, like Justin was talking about a property in Magnolia where there's, I know for a fact that there's liens on the property. So knowing that ahead of time could make a difference on either whether you purchase it or don't purchase it, or you know, what has to be done to it before you actually get to that point. But the offices are there for you as well as everyone else to go in and just double check these properties. You have a right to view the records. So you can call the office and you can make an appointment. It's the same thing as an OPRA. An OPRA is the Open Public Records Act. What that does is that allows the public to come in and either view or receive copies of municipal documents. So if it's pertaining to a property, if it's pertaining to a report, anything of that nature, then you can file this OPRA and request these documents. With the OPRA, be specific in your requests because it's a requirement of OPRA. You can file it on 1 property, you can file it on 10 properties. You can ask for basically anything, any open permits, expired permits, code violations, tax liens, utility liens, anything on any property, even if it's municipal owned. You have a right. It's transparency in the government, and that's what the OPRA was created for, basically. I will tell you too, if you file the OPRA and you are requesting copies, have them emailed to you. Emailed, it's not a whole lot of money, but if they make copies, it's 5 cents for every 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that they give you. But if you have them emailed to you, it doesn't cost anything. An OPRA request is required to be released within 7 days. If it's not, you can actually sue the municipality. That's the end result. sometimes if it's a lot of documents being asked for or a lot of information being asked for, then the municipality may ask you for an extension as a requester. But otherwise, I know me, if I get an Oprah and I get a lot of them, I try to get them off my desk right away because I hate doing them, but it's why I want to get rid of them right away. When you are, if you decide that you want to purchase a property and go in and do some work, there has been some questions as to what needs a permit, what doesn't, questions on what falls under minor work, what's ordinary repair. There's March 5th of 2005, there was changes to minor work and ordinary repair in the Uniform Construction Code. So you can sheetrock a house as long as it's less than 25% of the entire house and don't need a permit. Single family dwellings, standalone, no longer need roofing permits unless you touch the sheathing or the structural members. Electrical, you can change out receptacles. You can, when you add new, that becomes the issue. But changing them out, you don't need a permit for that. Changing out a dishwasher, anything low voltage of that nature, no longer needs a permit when you're changing it out. Heaters, water heaters, those all still need permits. They changed the regulations as to who can apply for those permits. Now, owner-occupied homes can do all the work themselves. As an investor, if you're going in and saying, well, I own the property, but I'm not going to live there. So anything electrical or plumbing has to be done by a New Jersey state licensed electrician or a New Jersey state licensed plumber. Building work you can do on your own. There's nothing that says that you can't. If you are, say, building from ground up and there's a warranty involved, if you are signing that you're doing all the work, you have to disclose that information for the next 10 years to anyone buying that property, that you did the work, you prepared the plans, whatever the case may be. But there's a disclosure that you are required by law to disclose that information to anyone. Let's see. I
have a question about the CCO.
Okay.
Now, is there like a limit to what that can be for? Like, all right, a finished basement, a water heater, or electrical panel, like those are fairly simple. But like, say there's like a addition on the back of the house or like a detached garage or something. Would that be something that you can get a CCO for? Mm-hmm. And the second part of the question is, what's the cost? Do they bill it like they would a normal permit, or like how does the billing go for that process? Like how does the fee structure situated?
Okay. So for the first part of your question, yes, you can get a CCO for anything, whether it be as a whole or, so there's different types of CCOs. There's a UCC, Uniform Construction Code CCO, which would be, the process of like if work was done without a permit. And then there's another part where a lot of the towns are doing rental inspections or resale inspections, and that's a different type of a CCO, which is not governed under the Uniform Construction Code. That usually follows like a property maintenance code. But yes, you can get a CCO. So if somebody finished off their garage or put in a heater or a water heater, it's just a matter of getting that permit. Pricing, cost of those are done by each municipality's fee schedule, which needs to be posted, needs to be in an ordinance, has to be approved by the DCA and approved by the governing body. So every town's is going to be different. There's no set standard to say a CCO is this across the board. It isn't. So you can before you start a project, if you wanted to get a copy of the town's fee schedule, ask for it. You're entitled to it.
Fee schedule for that the same as like a permit would be?
Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess my first part of that question was like, say somebody built like a detached garage or somebody built like a deck, like how can anyone ever know? Like the inspector can't know the size of the footings or how deep the footings are. So if he's given like a CCO permit and approving it, is he like, how's he approving the footings or like any major structural stuff or something like that? It can't just
If
be
it's if it's a concern of something structural like that, like the footings on a deck or something, in my experience, some of the code officials that I work with have asked them to maybe dig out one footing just so he can kind of see. And that's not something that's going to cost a lot. Not like if you're talking like interior where you have to open up a whole wall. That's a little more costly. So if it's just digging around a footing just to kind of get an idea of what the depth is. If it's something like if they built a garage and didn't get a permit, and or maybe there's some type of like engineered beam in there, something along those lines, then a code official may ask for sealed engineering it's a matter of, you know what, I didn't see it, I can't see it, so I need someone else to take their license and sign off on it before they'll take it and say, oh, it looks good to me. And that's what it comes down to. It comes down to a matter of whose license is going to protect what. What? No, I'm sorry, my son was talking to me. So a code official that's why they ask for, different sealed documents on different things, because they're not going to take the responsibility of saying, yes, that's okay, especially on anything structural. They're not structural engineers. They don't have that background. Some of them, if you come across a construction official is required to have one subcode license, only one. Most of them are multiple, but they're only required to have one subcode license. So they might be in the building field, they might be in the fire field or the plumbing. So, a plumbing guy going out to look at a structural beam, he doesn't even have the background to be able to sign off on that, which is why they would ask for engineering. Did that answer your question?
Yep, thank you.
I want to piggyback on that. So a CCO is only required on something that a permit was not originally closed out on, correct?
Yes, or it can also be used in I'll use this as an example, say a hair salon. A hair salon needs a copy of a certificate in order to open, because the State Board of Cosmetology has to come in, and one of their requirements is you have to have a certificate. So in instances where it's changed hands, but it's the same use, then the construction department will do a CCO, Certificate of Continued Occupancy. It's the same use, and they'll go through that process. It may be one inspector that goes out. Some municipalities, based on the construction official, how he wants to handle it, will send all 4 subcodes out to look at it. Normally it's a flat fee. So it might be, I don't know, $150, $125 based on the UCC end. If it's a CCO for the resale of a property or the rental of a property, that's a little different. And the Uniform Construction Code doesn't govern that. It's whatever code the town adopts, which most of them, it's the International Property Maintenance Code.
Gotcha. And my other question is, how far back do those records go? So if you purchase a house that has a deck on it, if that deck was built 30 years ago, do you need to go back 30 years and look for a permit, or like how far back does it go?
Well, okay, so that's records retention. Records retention on a residential structure is 10 years. Some some towns will have records older than that, but they're not required to keep them. You end up with a storage issue, no place to put them. A commercial property is life of the structure. So, you know, if somebody built a deck 30 years ago, I probably don't have those plans and don't have that proof. Sometimes we can go back into the tax records. For me, my assessor has become my best friend, because whenever there's a question as to whether or not something was or wasn't done in a specific time period, I can go back to her records, and they're pretty accurate, because every so often each town goes through a reevaluation, and those records are kept. Her records are kept. I don't know what the assessor's retention schedule is, but I know she's got copies of some pretty old records that I'm able to access. The other thing would be the county. Sometimes the county has those copies of things.
Yeah, I guess what I'm wondering is how crazy do we need to get if we're purchasing properties and looking at different things in terms of, oh, does that have a permit? Did that have a permit? Did that, you know, there's a shed. Did the shed have a permit? There's a driveway. Did they get a permit for the apron? Like, you know, is there, like, how crazy do we really need to get with it?
So I would suggest your first thing, if you find a property that you're interested in buying, then the first thing you do is file an open request with the clerk of the municipality. The clerk is the keeper of the records. That's who you go through. Even if it's construction documents, the clerk is the one that you have to file the OPRA through. File the OPRA, ask for documents going back 20 years. Be specific in your request. I would like all open, closed, and expired permits. Use those 3 words. All open, closed, and expired permits for this property from present day going back 20 years. That pretty much covers everything. Then they'll come back with whatever they have or don't have, and you can pretty much figure it out. I actually had a request today for that very same thing for the last 20 years, and the only permit I found was a shed. From those records, you'll be able to determine what they did or didn't have a permit for. And if you're, you know, if you're in the business of flipping, you can kind of figure out. Well, I'll tell you, electric wire is dated. So you can look at an electrical wire and tell when it was put in. Like, there's no question about it. Lumber is stamped, so you can tell when that was put in. So that's just little tricks that the inspectors look at when they go into properties, and they can tell. We had mold in our building, so a lot of our records got destroyed, our older records in Berlin. So it just kind of depends on the town, but they should have pretty old records. And it's not a matter of like going into, you know, pick out to say what, oh, if something doesn't look right, like I tell people all the time, if it doesn't look right, then question it. Because it's only going to benefit you walking in as an investor to be able to determine what did or didn't have a permit. Now, something simple like a heater or a water heater, you know, if you end up having to pull a permit for that, that's super easy. That's not a big deal. It shouldn't even take a long time to go through the permit process. But when you're talking something a little bit more major, like, you know, basements being finished, or you know, second story decks being put in and it's being held up by cinder block, and the center of the deck is bowed, so you know those beams aren't right. Things like that are pretty obvious, and those are the things that the inspectors are going to look for when they do the CCO inspection on a resale.
Cool, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So getting back to like the permit end of it, there's always a big question with, like I said, what needs a permit, what doesn't need a permit, what paperwork gets filed. If you're the investor, you're the owner of the property. The permits you can apply for everything but new electric, new plumbing, unless you're going to live there. And there's something on the inside of the permit jacket and on each one of the text sheets. It's an area called the certification in lieu of oath. It's a legal document. If you sign saying that you're the owner, you're going to live there, and you end up selling it, you falsified a document, that will constitute a $500 penalty right off the bat. The other thing is older towns, you want to double check on historical. If any of the towns have a historical preservation or a historical commission, I can tell you Camden is a big one. Camden has a historical commission that will take you probably 6 months to get in front of, just to repair a roof. So you want to be careful if you're investing in a property that's in a historical area, because they have all different guidelines. Sometimes you have to go in front of that historical commission before you can even apply for your construction permits. So always check if there is a historical area in any of the towns that you're looking at properties in. Magnolia does not have one. Berlin Boro does. They do have a historical preservation commission, and they're very active with their properties and the upkeep of the historical properties. So that's something to be cautious of. Sometimes it can go right down to what color siding, what type of windows, what kind of bushes that you can plant. I mean, it gets a little crazy.
Debbie, I have a question here. This is me. You're talking about the certification in lieu of oath. If I'm doing a live-in flip, so if I'm able to do the work by myself because I live here.
Right.
Then you said if I sell it, like, is there a time period? Do you have to live there for a year? Do you have to live there for like 6 months, or you know what I mean, before I could sell it and avoid a penalty?
You have to live there for at least a year.
Okay. At the time that the permit is pulled?
Right.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's funny. We had an incident when I worked in Gloucester Township, and the house is actually right down the street from me, where a gentleman came in and he was an investor. The house came out beautiful. It really did. He did a fabulous job, but it was, my house, I'm going to live there. He drew the plans, he did all the electric, he filed that paperwork as though he was doing it. Not even a day after the certificate of occupancy was issued, the construction official happened to be driving by, and there was a big sign out there that said auction, house auction. So when he saw that, the construction official actually has the right to rescind the certificate, which is exactly what he did. The investor then had to go get an architect, a licensed electrician, a licensed plumber. It ended up costing him a lot of work on top of the fines that the construction official imposed on that person. So sometimes it's just not worth it to kind of find that loophole. Just do what's being asked. The ongoing joke kind of is like, uniform construction code's not really uniform, and it's not. I mean, it is, but it's not. It's designed to be, but it's interpreted. So your ordinances are meant to be interpreted. Who's the interpreting individual? The zoning officer. Same thing with the construction codes. They are written to be interpreted. The interpreting individual is that construction official, building subcode, electrical, whatever applies. So you can read a document and I can read a document, and we'll both get two different things out of it. So it just depends on the person. A lot of times if I'm unsure, I will refer to my board solicitor. And I will get the attorney's viewpoint as to what this was supposed to mean. And that helps me out tremendously. Keeps me out of trouble.
Thanks.
So does anybody else have any other questions? I mean, I'm not really sure what else you wanted to go over.
Yeah, I think that was pretty good. Are you done with your presentation?
I have a question. Is
Go
there,
ahead. Mhm.
if we want to find out like the zoning of a property, can we file what is it, Open Public Records Act for that, or no?
You can. Some municipalities have all of that online. So your zoning ordinances, your land use is made up of a text and a map. So the text is the actual ordinance that tells you what you can and can't do in specific areas of the town. And the map, of course, is going to show you zonings. They're usually color coded. You have different areas of residential. So you might have like R1, R2, R3, or Magnolia does it by letters. They have RA and RB. Different commercial zones.
Okay.
Berlin, I have C1, C2, C3. I also
Okay.
have small areas that I deal with pine lands on. And then there's your institutional, your educational. They're all normally color coded and identified on a zoning map. So if the municipality doesn't have it online, you should be able to just pick up the phone, call the office and ask, hey, I'm interested in this property. Can you tell me what it's zoned? And
Yeah,
along
so-
with that, you can go into the code book and it should tell you what permitted use is, what your bulk standards are, things like that.
Okay, because there's a property that's in an R3 zone,
Mhm.
but it is a triplex, and
Okay.
I called them and they said, like you said earlier, the term grandfathered in or
Mhm.
non-conforming use, they weren't able to tell me that. They said I had to go like in front of the board and see me this application and all that. I just didn't know if it was a way to find out without doing all of that.
You can check with the assessor and see how they have it assessed. If they have it assessed as a triplex, and it's always been a triplex. So was it someone in the office, like a secretary, or did you speak to the zoning officer?
I spoke to the zoning person. So it's always been a triplex. And then they came and I guess rezoned that section as single family.
Okay, the next question would be, is it vacant?
Yes, it is vacant.
Okay. Okay, so when you're dealing with something like that, land use has a term like vacant or abandoned. So if the use has not been used as it was for a certain amount of time, then the zoning officer can deem it abandoned. And at that point, even though it was always used as a triplex, it was rezoned, now you have to come in front of the board because it's been vacant for a certain period of time or abandoned.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And what would that process be like if he did want to purchase that property and keep it as a triplex and go in front of the board? What's that process like?
So at that point, you're filing for a D variance, which is a use. I will tell you the use variance, the biggest thing, you have to prove positive and negative criteria. In the municipal land use law, there is specific verbiage that you need to use when stating positive and negative criteria when you're in front of the board. It's a requirement. If you purchase the property or are interested in the property and you're an LLC, you're a corporation, if you're not a sole proprietor, then you have to be represented by an attorney. That's state law. So if you buy it as, like I said, if you're not a sole proprietor, it could become costly. A lot of times they want, there's a checklist. Every application should have a checklist when it comes to site plans, subdivisions, variances. Each town has their own checklist as to what you need to supply to them. There's a set of rules All of that should be provided to you as part of the application and what the process is. So you fill out the application, they're going to ask you for escrow. Escrow is dependent upon the fees that the engineers, solicitors, and planners would charge on the board. So you as an applicant, you have to pay that. That's not anything that the town pays. You as a developer, they're going to consider you a developer, that you have to pay that escrow. And whatever the hourly rate, I usually just call my engineer or my planner and say, you know, this is what I have in front of me, and they'll give me an estimated number that I have to collect for escrow. Depending on the type of application that it is, will depend on the fees. So say for instance, it's a residential use variance, it might be $300, where a commercial use variance is $600. So just, it depends. Again, it should be listed in a fee schedule for any municipality so that you know what you're paying ahead of time.
I have just one comment to that. I forgot who asked the question, but this is a situation where you should be having that as part of the contract, a contingency. And because this could take a long time, because remember, even if you go before the board and the board acts promptly, and in these COVID times, the boards have not really been acting that promptly, you then have to wait until the resolution is passed. The resolution gets passed, it gets published. You then have 45 days for that, for someone to come in and do an action in lieu of prerogative writs or to challenge it in court. So this is a situation where if you're thinking of buying the property and you're going to be in it next week, that's not going to happen.
Yes, that's what we did. We actually put the offer in with that as a contingency. Because that was my concern, because I was worried, because I'm in Merchantville and I know they don't really want multifamilies, and this is one of those type of properties.
Yeah, Merchantville is trying to get rid of the multifamilies in order to keep the values up. Correct. And to keep the community up. So you're absolutely right, Marcus. Yeah. And it's a situation where if the person's looking for a fast settlement, they're not going to get it, just like you're not going to get it.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Right. And when you're dealing with municipal government, everything has a timeline. Everything. We have a certain amount of time to act on every single thing. So like I said, Oprah, 7 days. We have 7 days to get you that information. Construction permit, 10 to 20 business days. You have to have some kind of an answer, whether it's an approval or a denial. Zoning permit, 10 days. Automatic approval if you don't get it. The land use board, we have 45 days to act on an application. And even filing deeds, depending on if it's a, subdivision, if you have anywhere from 90 to 180 days based on what you have going on in front of you. So everything has a timeline. And that's imposed on us as municipal government. Not so much you, unless you're the developer and then you have to go file a deed at the county, then yes, you're under a timeline for that.
But the problem is, even though the municipality has a timeline, if the board asks you, well, will you extend this, and you don't do it, you lose. So the reality of it is, there really isn't a timeline if you want to get your variance.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's definitely beneficial to kind of work with the town, because in the long run, they kind of hold the reins. They really do. And now in these times, I will tell you that Magnolia has not had a land use board meeting since COVID started, because my board solicitor feels that there's a legal issue with having a Zoom or a virtual meeting, because again, 10 days prior to any meeting date, I, as a board secretary, have to be able to provide to the public, anyone interested, plans, applications, engineer reports, all of that has to be available to the public. The public also has a right to come to the meeting. You could live in Vineland and come to a meeting in Magnolia. It doesn't matter where you live. It's a public meeting regardless. You have a right to speak. You have a right to be heard. You have a right to hear the application. Now, if you are not, within that, say, 200 feet that you have to be noticed for something, you may not know about the meeting. You might not have internet. You might not know how to work a computer. So for those reasons, you've now excluded people, which is why my board attorney felt that we can't do a Zoom meeting, because there was just too much out there where people weren't going to be able to access what they needed to by law. Waterford, we did do virtual meetings and they were awful, horrible. It just seemed like no matter what time I signed onto the computer, Windows decided to update. So, I mean, it was completely out of my hands, and it's like, you know, I have to sit there till the computer was done, and it was crazy. Berlin, I had a couple of applications pending, but fortunate enough that the few that I had, none were complete. One of them was a developer that was purchasing a property that was, it was a situation where a woman had the property and the property had a garage, and then over top of the garage, they made kind of like an apartment where her son lived. So when the investor bought it, they said, oh, you know, it's always been this way. No, I mean, not legally. It was a mom that was kind of giving a separate area for her son to live. So it was never really registered as a rental. It was never deemed as like a duplex or a secondary, apartment, a legal apartment at all. So he ended up having to come in front of the board. And because it took so long, the investor backed out of the deal. So that can happen. I mean, I think now towns are moving a little bit more forward with opening up. I know Magnolia, I just got an email from the mayor tonight that August 17th is the date that she wants to open to the public. Berlin Boro is open. We've been open. Like in my office, I'm the only office that doesn't have protection, for lack of a better term. So I kind of have a makeshift thing that Public Works made for me. You have to wear a mask when you come in. If I leave my office, I have to wear a mask, but other than that, if I'm sitting at my desk, I'm good. So all the towns are doing it differently. Gloucester Township, if you need anything from any of their offices, you have to call and make an appointment. So they're by appointment only. I don't even know when they're going to open.
I have a question. I'm just going to kind of run this like situation by you and tell me what you think. So I have a rental property, has a detached garage. The tenant owns a concrete business, and he keeps like some materials, and like he has like a skid steer, like a small, it's not a backhoe, but like a small machine. He would store it in the garage and then, you know, put it on and off of his trailer when he was like using it. And the zoning, I don't know if it was a zoning official or somebody from the township, called me and like sent us like a letter or whatever, and he said, you know, you're running a business from this property, and you're like, it's not zoned commercial. I'm like, he's not running a business from the property, he's just like keeping his stuff in the garage. Like, where does that line drawn between running a business from a property and just keeping your stuff there, like your stuff to run your business or manage your business?
So typically speaking, when you look at any zoning ordinance, commercial vehicles are not allowed in a residential district. So that, as a zoning officer, that's the first thing I would look at. So if you're bringing a commercial vehicle and it's exiting and entering on a daily basis, that more or less means you're running a business from that premises. It doesn't necessarily have to be where other people are coming or you have workers coming there or anything of like that. You have a commercial vehicle that's entering and exiting on a daily basis. Even though it's just a matter of storing that in their garage, that causes a problem for the people, you know, the neighbors and whatnot. Now, if it's a situation where they have like at-home office, and it's just making phone calls and things like that, that's usually not a problem. But it's the commercial vehicle.
So what's a definition of commercial vehicle? Like a machine or like just a vehicle that's registered commercial?
Check the zoning ordinances to the town. Berlin Boro references commercial vehicles by a weight limit. So I can have a conversion van that has commercial tags. That's not a commercial vehicle.
Right.
It goes by weight limit. So that's just an instance where you have to double check the local ordinances of whatever town it's in. So sometimes it's hard to maneuver through those ordinances. So some towns have it set up with like all the regulations that deal with, a C1 zone are all in one place, but they're not. So like signage is in a separate place. You might have, like fences aren't allowed in a commercial zone. I don't know why, but whoever wrote the ordinance, that's what they said. You can't have a fence. It didn't make sense. I would think you have to, especially if you back up to residential, you have to have a buffer.
All right. Now, how about driveways? Like if you want to add a driveway, I guess there's two trains of thought for me. Is like if you're cutting the curb, that obviously would require a zoning approval. But if you're just adding, correct me if I'm wrong, it would require zoning, right? If you're cutting the curb.
Anything disturbing the original footprint of the property requires zoning approval.
Okay.
That's just like my rule of thumb.
Mhm.
And it's the easiest way to put it. Now, again, you would have to check the local ordinances because some of them stipulate like a minimum width and a maximum width of a driveway based on the zoning of the property. Some will stipulate material type. Some will tell you can't have a stone driveway because when you're driving in and out, stones fly all over the place and they don't want them, that it has to be either asphalt or concrete.
So whatever you're going to do has to be approved for something like that most often.
Yes. And then sometimes you're dealing with associations. So if you're looking at like a townhouse situation, sometimes there's an association and they have, you have to get that approval before you can even go to the zoning officer. So there's prior approvals for everything. Zoning is actually a prior approval to the construction permit, and things like outside agencies, Pinelands. Maybe the house is on a state or county road. So when you start doing a driveway, you may need state or county approval for that. Berlin Boro has a lot of county roads: Jackson Road, Taunton Avenue, Cross Keys Road, Watsontown New Freedom Road. They're all county roads. They need county approval to do anything. Magnolia has Evesham Road. That's a county road. White Horse Pike is a state road. So when you're doing anything along those frontages, you need that outside agency approval before you can do anything. Okay. Did anybody else have any questions?
Yes. Is there a process to get? Let me see. The question is getting lots reversed to subdivide.
To subdivide, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So to subdivide a property, you have minor and major and minor subdivisions, and the definition falls in the land use law and your local ordinance as to what constitutes a major subdivision and what constitutes a minor. And you do go in front of the land use board, and it is the same process as you would for a variance. You file the application. Your first step would be to go to an engineer and have them design, the layout and how the lots will be situated, where those subdivision lines are going to be, where the property lines, how they divide up the property. And usually the board secretary will, after you take in all the paperwork and everything. For me, I give a copy of the plan to my tax assessor because she's going to approve the block and lots, and she's going to approve the proposed addresses. And you also have to check with county 911. So for 911 purposes, they want to make sure that the addresses coincide properly. So when you call the police department, they're not running around in circles trying to figure out, wait a minute, where's 101? This says 107. Why is this 101? Like it has to make sense. So when you file that application for the subdivision, there's also a checklist that goes along with it. So there's specific things that you have to provide based on the municipality. They each make up their own checklist. But the normal things that you would have to supply would be a certain amount of copies of the application, the subdivision, the proposed subdivision plan. If it's on a larger scale, you may have to provide an environmental impact statement or a traffic impact statement. I had a 16-lot subdivision go in off of Wyndham Road in Berlin. So it was Wyndham Road to New Freedom Road, and because it was coming off of a county road, they wanted to see a traffic report. But you don't need one all the time. Now there's a minor subdivision going in we just finished up on Gardens Avenue that didn't need any of that because it was just simple, like moving a lot line basically, but it's still considered a subdivision. So anytime you add to a parcel or take from a parcel to another, it's a subdivision. Like people, oh, I'm just moving a lot line. It's still a subdivision.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Is the application online, or do you have to go to the municipality? How do we?
I have mine online because it's easier for me. Some towns, again, it's just from one municipality to another what their preference is. I think a lot of towns are trying to become more public friendly, where you can find everything online. It's just a matter of how they design their website and how easy it is to find the documents. And so it could be online, and it could be that you have to either go pick it up or have it mailed or faxed or emailed. But there should,
thank you.
You're welcome. And they should always provide you with a set of rules. Their rules are going to explain to you what you have to submit with any specific application. And their rules should also tell you the meeting process, we'll say. So it's a quasi-judicial situation where the board acts on behalf of the municipality. The applicant or developer is basically there to present their case, why they want to do what they want to do, prove your positives or your negatives. What's your hardship? Why do you need this variance? That sort of thing. And the public has a right to speak. So you could have, 100 people come out and say, we don't want this. But if you've done your due diligence and the board is happy with what you've submitted and your testimony, they can still approve it regardless of what the public thinks. So it's never a given situation. I get phone calls a lot that they'll say, well, this is what I want to do. And, what do you think the board's reaction is going to be? Oh, no. Every application is dealt with on a case-by-case basis. They're never the same. So it just depends. So you're never guaranteed approval, but it's not always a given denial either.
A question. Any idea what a simple subdivision would cost?
Every municipality is going to be different because they make up their own fee schedule. And the fee schedule is supposed to be made up so that it covers the expenses of the department. I would say on the average, like for a simple subdivision might be like 2 to 3 lots. You're probably looking at maybe, I would say $2,500 for escrow, and you're probably looking at maybe somewhere around $300 for an application fee. That's okay. Just an average, I guess.
Yep, good, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible to have your contact information?
Sure. Actually, Dan has my my email. He has my phone number. So Dan, you're more than welcome to share that with whoever needs it.
Okay, yeah, if you want, we could put it up on the Facebook page, if you're cool with that, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. And feel free to call me with whatever.
Can you put it in the chat then?
Oh, sure. I can do that. You just have to remember to get it before we close the chat.
Debbie, I'm going to leave, but I want to say this has been really helpful to me, and I appreciate all your explanation.
Thank you. Thank you. I always say if I can help just one person, that makes me happy.
You just helped 2.
Good.